In this video, we're going to talk about the third dimension of dependency injection, which is interception. To understand interception, let's go back to our original book service class, which created an instance of book repository in its constructor. Now, in this design, it is impossible to intercept the book repository dependency. In other words, reach out to this book repository dependency and possibly modify it by wrapping another class around it and then pass it to the book service class. But in our new book service class, since it programs to an abstraction and uses the constructor injection design pattern, it makes it possible to intercept the book repository dependency by wrapping another class around it and then pass it to the book service constructor. Now, why would we need to do that? Let's say, for example, once we add a book to the database, we want to write some information to the console saying book added with its title. In our original book service class, where can we write this logic? We have two choices. We can either go to the book service class and at the end of the addBook method, we can write our logic console.writeLine book added book.title, or we can write the logic in our book repository class at the end of the addBook async method, the same logic console.writeLine book added book.title. But either way, we are violating the open-closed principle, which is one of the 5 solid principles of object-oriented design. This principle states that software entities such as classes should be open for extension but closed for modification. This means that we should be able to extend code by adding new code, not modifying existing code. On the other hand, if the book service class programmed to an abstraction and used constructor injection, then we don't have to modify either the book service class or the book repository class to add such behavior. Instead, what we can do is we can create a new class called logging book repository, and this class needs to implement the decorator pattern. So we can let it implement iBook repository and also inject iBook repository and store it in a private read-only field. In the implementation of the addBook async method, we can delegate the call to the wrapped iBook repository's addBook async method. And after this, we can write our logic console.writeLine book added book.title. This way, we are able to add our logic without having to modify existing code. Now, what this means is that when book service accepts iBook repository as a dependency, instead of passing a book repository object to the book services constructor, we are intercepting that dependency by modifying it and wrapping another class around it, which is the logging book repository class. The logging book repository class invokes the inner book repository's addBook async method and writes information to the console, and we are passing that logging book repository object to the book services constructor. In order to achieve what I said, we have to make changes to the composition root. So as you can see, I have the lines from the earlier demo commented out, and we need to register a scoped service of type book service. So say builder.services.addScoped of book service. Next, we can say builder.services.addScoped of iBook repository. We can then pass in a lambda function taking a service provider, SP. So this lambda will be executed whenever a class specifies iBook repository as a dependency. Then inside the lambda function, we can create an instance of logging book repository. Since the logging book repository constructor accepts an iBook repository implementation, we can use the passed in service provider, SP, to get a required service of book repository. Again, we'll talk more about different ways of registering services in the next section. Here we are specifying a dependency of type book repository, so we need to register that service as well. So say builder.services.addScoped of book repository. Now if we run the application and navigate to /add-book, let's enter some book information and click on the submit button. Now if we go to the console, we see our information, book added with its title. This way, we are able to implement our logging behavior by intercepting the book repository dependency and wrapping a class around it called logging book repository, and we didn't have to touch the existing book service or book repository classes. In the next section, we'll be taking a more closer look at the .NET's built-in dependency injection container.